To put it very succinctly for your audience, Jesus teaches us as Christians to bear a cross for our enemies, and Christian nationalism wants to build a cross to crucify theirs. That's the difference. So it's not just Christianity, it's a very specific strain of Christian thinking that is militant and that will take over if it gets the chance to do it.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Statistics show us that the importance of religion in the lives of Americans is shrinking. A new study from the Pew Research Center found that the largest religious group in America is now what's being called the nones. Not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, meaning religiously unaffiliated. A group of people made up of atheists, agnostics, and people who say their religion is nothing in particular. The survey showed that many people in this group believe in some kind of higher power, but don't follow any particular religion or participate in any type of religious service. This group of nones is now a bigger group than U.S. Catholics or evangelical Protestants. American Christians on the whole are still the largest group, but a 2022 study found that the American Christian majority is on track to end in the next coming decades. Which might be why certain Christians, particularly Christian nationalists, are fighting as hard as they can to retain power. For them, this is it. They solidify their place at the top now, or they are forced forever to share it with those they deem less worthy. To talk about the dangers of rising Christian nationalism in America and the evangelical faith's growing need to dominate all aspects of American life, today's guest is Tim Whitaker. Tim is the founder of the New Evangelicals, an inclusive, Jesus-centered community that holds space for those marginalized by the evangelical church through building community, exploring faith, and advocating for systemic change. Raised deep in the evangelical church, Tim started to question his faith leaders in the year leading up to Trump, when he found that the faith he was raised in was so incongruous with the man he was told to vote for. Confused but undeterred, Tim dove into study for deeper understanding of the church, and the more he uncovered, the more he felt it was his responsibility to hold the toxic churches and their leaders accountable while still offering a home of faith to his fellow Christians. He now hosts a podcast, is producing a documentary, and writing a book, but he spends a fair amount of time these days on social media warning us of the risks of rising Christian nationalism. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, educator, influencer, and former evangelical Christian deconstructing his faith, Tim Whitaker. Welcome, Tim.
Oh boy. Educator, influencer.
You
Whoa,
are!
some big titles,
You
man.
are!
Thank you. That's super kind. It means a lot to be here. It really does. Thank you so much.
Honestly, thank you for joining us. I'm actually completely fascinated by your work because despite the fact that, as you've called it, you are deconstructing your faith, you still remain a man of deep faith. And I would love it if you could just give us some background. How did you come to this work? Why did you think it was essential to shine a light on what's going on right now with the evangelical and right-wing Christian movement? And why you felt that this was something you had to be doing?
Sure. I will give you the Cliff Notes and we can unpack whatever you want.
Perfect.
Here's the short story. I grew up deeply embedded in what is known as conservative evangelicalism. I was homeschooled for 9 years, grew up in a church that believed in singing only hymns with like a piano. So very, very traditional. And over time, I was just deeply radicalized by that tradition to become a Christian. I always believed in Jesus, always wanted to be the best Christian I knew how to be, and my life reflected that. So in the evangelical world, there's a lot of things that you just kind of do that I did. So I was a drummer in the worship team as we got more modern music. I did a lot of missions work. I worked with a lot of parachurch organizations. So these are organizations that do Christian work but aren't actually churches. They're usually just nonprofits. I help plant churches. I've led small groups, etc. And so I did all of this, and through a lot of different twists and turns, I was always curious about my faith and trying to be the best follower of Jesus I knew how to be at any given time. And essentially, I had a very formative couple years in my late teens, early 20s. I was part of a community group, or like a small group of people who were like-minded, who just wanted to follow Jesus as best as possible. So this got me to a place where I was able to ask more questions like, how do we do church? And what does it mean to be a Christian, et cetera? So I've always been curious about being that radical Christ follower. And all along the way, I had a lot of these micro moments. There were maybe dozens of them where I would go, that's a little weird. Like, for example, here's a silly one. I would look at my tradition, I'd be like, why are we always waging war on Starbucks during Christmas time? Like, I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal? If they want to say happy holidays and not Merry Christmas, who cares, right? That's weird, but I can stomach that. So you kind of keep moving. And then as I got older, I realized that there were just some theological beliefs around how I was taught to understand God and who God is that I couldn't reconcile. So not to give your audience too deep of a dive, but one example of this is I was brought up in a tradition that taught me that God, before the world was created, predetermined who would go to heaven or hell. And there was no option. It's called determinism. And so it's all been decreed by God. It's all been the game set and match. And I was predestined because I was a Christian, and other people who were not just had no choice to go to the bad place. Again, when you grow up that way, it's kind of normalized. And so you get older, you start examining, well, that doesn't make sense with this idea of God being loving. And how is that just or ethical, et cetera, right? So I've had all these little micro moments, but eventually, what really got me to a point where I said, I really think something is wrong in my faith tradition was in 2016 with the rise of Trump, because I grew up in a Christian ethic that was very clear about their sexual boundaries. And I was one of the kids that believed it, right? So, all right, Tim, you're a teenage boy. Here's the rules. You don't touch yourself or anyone else until you're married. Good luck. Okay, that's what I'll do. I have to be sexually pure. The term for this is called purity culture. So I grew up that way, and that was my whole ethic. You know, we couldn't watch certain movies. I couldn't watch movies with, I couldn't watch The Little Mermaid because Ariel wore a bikini. I mean, that's just kind of how I grew up in that kind of world. It's true. It's completely true. So you can imagine my shock when this man named Trump comes on the scene as a nominee, and he's kind of a bully and says some crass things. And I'm like, oh, this guy, no Christian's going to want this dude as the nominee. And slowly but surely, he gets closer to becoming the Republican nominee, which of course, as a Christian, you vote Republican. Like they're kind of assimilated. So when all this is happening, I'm like, wait, nothing is adding up. And then the Access Hollywood tapes came out, right? So Trump is caught on a hot mic bragging about assaulting women. And I thought to myself, oh, this dude's toast. There's no way evangelicals like Franklin Graham and these people who I grew up being taught by are going to say, yes, that's our dude. So for like maybe 3 days, I got real giddy. I'm like, well, maybe we'll have our own political movement. Like maybe we'll have a third option now, because this guy obviously isn't an option. And of course, as a Christian, a Democrat's not an option. So maybe we go a third way. And then I heard we need a commander-in-chief, not a pastor-in-chief. And I thought to myself, something is really wrong here. You're telling me that the guy on the cover of Playboy magazine, the guy accused of assaulting women, who we now know actually did, he was found liable in a court of law for this, the guy who's on his third marriage, who embodies none of the family values or the ethics that you taught me are the way of Jesus and of how God has ordered the world, I'm suddenly the heretic because I can't vote for that dude? Something is really wrong. So that was the beginning of me seriously having to renegotiate my faith, because again, it's not that I left my faith, it's that I was so committed to it. My own tradition, I thought, wasn't in line with like the ethics and teachings of Jesus. And then of course we had the Black Lives Matter movement, and we had the COVID pandemic. And so all of those three things really opened my eyes to where I said, in my tradition, which I would call as white evangelicalism, we're way off on all these issues. You know how jarring it is to see pastors that you know retweet videos called the plandemic, why this was a plandemic, and you're like, are you joking? A plan? Where are we going with this stuff? Like during COVID, people are dying. I watched a worship leader, that's a guy who takes a guitar and sings songs to Jesus. I watched a man, his name is Sean Foyt, tour the US in the middle of lockdown saying faith over fear, wearing a mask is tyrannical, we're not going to be silenced, and we have to get in mass gatherings and worship God together in the public square during a pandemic. I was a drummer in the church, and I thought, this math ain't mathing. Like, this is not how we love our neighbor. So all of those moments got me to a point where I said, we need a new evangelical movement. I went on Instagram in my attic saying, here goes nothing. Let's see what happens. And 3.5 years later, we're a nonprofit, and I do this work full time. That's the story.
It's a good story, man. And it's Well, it's like that kind of self-questioning is very difficult. And it's why a lot of people don't do it, right? It's why they keep returning to the words on the page to justify behaviors that make no sense. Like, I think people really get themselves into a quandary because if they think too hard about it, like you're saying, watching Christian leaders not disavowing Trump after the Access Hollywood tape came out, I spent those 3 days thinking he was toast too, and I am not from the evangelical church. I was like, this guy's done. I mean, it used to be that, you caught someone who might have been a philanderer and it was done. You know what I mean? You caught someone yelling too loud, you were done. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, this wasn't done. And then Trump went on to win 75% of the evangelical vote in 2016. And that probably was a time where you started to think, okay, there's a major problem with this faith tradition that I am completely immersed in, and I have to seek a different path.
That's right.
Wow.
That's completely correct. I mean, and don't forget, 80% voted for him in 2020 of white evangelicals. So his support only went up, not down, right? So it was just, I was doing this work. I started December of 2020. So the next month was the insurrection, right? I'm seeing Jesus flags being waved, and I am just so disoriented. I'm watching people pray to Jesus in the Capitol building, thanking Jesus for the opportunity to do this. And I'm thinking, what has happened to the way of the nonviolent Jesus? Like, this is, how would Jesus be in the middle of this? Like, what Jesus are we talking about here? Because it's not the one that I knew or that I read about in the scripture. So it is very disorienting when your whole mind is shaped in a particular way around faith and theology and Jesus and God. And then all of a sudden there are these, not just small, right? It's not 1,000 paper cuts. It's like massive sledgehammer blows. And you're like, I can't ignore what is happening. It's also incredibly disorienting. And then again, seeing our faith leaders, some of them, decried the violence. Thank you. That's like low bar, but none of them acknowledged the Christian theology that undergirded so much of January 6th, which we now know was even worse than we think, thanks to the work of people like Matthew Taylor, who tracks what's called the New Apostolic Reformation. I mean, it's deep, friends. People don't understand how deep this rabbit hole goes. It's deep.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you were talking about there is that you point out in your work too, is that if you're raised in this church, if you're raised in the evangelical church, which I wasn't, so this is new to me, you're basically taught that you're born wicked, that you are an innately sinful person. And this belief causes people who learn it, understandably, I think, to have a lot of self-doubt or low self-esteem,
Yes.
which honestly probably makes the entire group easier to control. Does that sound right to you?
Yes. So let's just be very clear. And like you, I like giving people correct information.
Please,
right?
I would love it.
The term evangelical is a very broad term, and any legitimate historian of this world will tell you it's a very hard term to define, because you can define it sociologically, economically, culturally, theologically. So it is a broad term, admittedly. And again, Kristen Dumais wrote a great book on this, Jesus and John Wayne. It's one of the staples that track a lot of this. And even she says it's a hard term to define. But I would say, based on what I know in my experience, broadly speaking, you are correct. The term is called total depravity, or original sin. And it is the idea, and it depends on what room in the evangelical tradition you're a part of, but the idea is that you are born separated from God, you are born wicked and depraved, you can do nothing right apart from God's work inside of you. That's kind of the idea. There are Bible verses that people will take out of their context and say, look, here's the Bible verse that supports our view. And one of them is found in the book of Jeremiah, where it says that the heart is totally wicked and deceitful, who can really know it? And so that is used as a way to tell children, and I'm one of them, when they're very young, hey, your heart really isn't trustworthy. You can't go by your intuition or your emotions. God has to make your heart new and give you the Holy Spirit. And that will give you a better sense of morality and a better sense of guidance. That's a very nice way of putting it. There are some people who will just tell you you're totally wicked and depraved and that you deserve to burn forever in hell unless God redeems you. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's real teaching that many people, including myself, heard growing up.
Well, that kind of goes with the section on the New Evangelical website that says, we know that you have church hurt. You have that in on your website, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation about it, because it feels to me through your work with the New Evangelicals that you believe that the traditional evangelical church has kind of lost its way, but there's still a place for everyone in your faith. Can you speak to that just a tiny bit?
The way that we think about it is a lot of us were taught that this way of being Christian is the only true way to be Christians. I mean, this sounds silly to tell people who don't grow up in this world, but I was taught that Catholics aren't really Christians. Now, the Catholic tradition predates my tradition by like 1,000+ years, but somehow they were never really Christians.
No, I find it interesting. As someone who was raised Episcopalian, it was Anglican in Canada, and then when I got to the States, it was Episcopalian. I find it interesting because people say, oh, we're a Christian nation. And I want to say, well, which Christianity?
Right.
Because they don't all think it's the same.
Yes. And we can talk about that and how that fleshes out with Christian nationalism later. I have thoughts on that.
Yeah.
But yes, essentially what we say is, listen, we realize that in particular, the white evangelical expression, and the white part's very key for this, has really lost its way. It's done a lot of damage. There's a lot of unaccountable leaders in these spaces who do a lot of harm, and we have to find a better path forward in our faith. And so one way to give your audience maybe a mental image is think about a house, like a big house. I'm talking several stories, hundreds of rooms.
Like a pastor's house? Like
yeah,
a
maybe
super
like
pastor's house?
Like a Joel Osteen's house.
Some kind of okay, we'll picture that.
Must be nice, Yeah, multiple mansions and stuff,
Sure.
A lot of us grew up in what I call is the basement of that house. And we were taught all there is to being a true Christian is what's inside this basement. And the basement was kind of damp and moldy, but it's all we knew. And the people in there were like, listen, there's nothing beyond those stairs. Don't walk up. It's just a desert wasteland. And then essentially, for whatever reason, there's many reasons, someone gets so desperate or they get so messed up by what's down there, they go, you know what? I'm taking my chances. I'm walking upstairs. And when they open the door, they're expecting this desert, like this barren wasteland. But they find that they were actually in a massive house of Christian thought the entire time, full of rooms and other traditions and ways of being that were there the whole time. And so a lot of people are so disoriented when they discover that you can actually be, I would argue, a more faithful follower of Jesus by leaving that basement and finding better rooms of Christian thought that are more inclusive and justice-oriented and want to love all of our neighbors, not just the white Christian ones, right? And so we help people kind of navigate that in their faith. And to be very clear, some people get so messed up by that basement, the second they get above ground, they run straight out the door. And they go, I can't be anywhere near this Christian thing. And that's totally respectable. It's not a judgment call on my end. I totally get it. But for our work, we're all about helping people explore what else is out there inside of the Christian house.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Like I said, I was raised very firmly in the Episcopalian tradition, and I never felt any shame or judgment from my faith. If anything, I felt love and sense of belonging, right? But as I got older, and quite frankly, as I moved to the States, I started to feel more monitored by the church. They had a lot of expectations on my husband and I, who had joined a church together here. And I really didn't like that. I felt a lot of pressure. I didn't like that. And these days, based on the Christian tradition in this country and how it comes with so much bigotry, so much judgment, so much white power, honestly, as a white person, I found that I associate myself closer to agnostic than anything these days. Like, I think a lot of people are backing away from the church because they say, well, that's not me. I still have a lot of faith. I just don't like religion.
Totally. I mean, that is the rise of the nuns. There's a reason why the church is shrinking in America. The Southern Baptist Convention, one of the largest evangelical denominations, is seeing record losses, right? So we see the shift totally. And what's interesting, though, is the rise of the nuns. Those are people who would not identify as religious. About half of them still identify as spiritual. And that makes sense because I do think a lot of people were formed by some form of Christian thinking, especially in the West, in America. So there's something to maybe the Jesus ethic of like loving our neighbor that people find really attractive, but they can't attach it to like this white evangelical nationalism that they see is being used as a weapon to bludgeon our queer neighbors with, right? Our BIPOC neighbors with, etc. So I totally get that. It makes complete sense.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about Christian nationalism, because when I found you, I was doing work on rising Christian nationalism. And then you were out here calling attention to the danger of this form of weaponized Christianity. And you're clearly not the only person raised in the Christian faith who's out here trying to call attention to this. Do you think enough people even understand what Christian nationalism is to be appropriately concerned about the threat it poses?
It's so tough to know because I do still live in a bubble.
Yeah, of course.
I track this all day, right? Most of my friends now knows. Hey, who doesn't know, right? Here's my hypothesis. I think that the average American going through their life, just doing their thing, who's not really tuned in, has no clue about this. They don't know. Maybe they've heard of the term Christian nationalism somewhere, but they don't know what it means. So I don't think a lot of people understand the term, and it's understandable. It's a pretty broad term. It can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I would argue, in my estimation, it is the greatest threat to democracy that America faces. And it's certainly the biggest threat to all of our marginalized neighbors by far. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this, because I do know that most of the views that Christian nationalism holds are not popular with the American public, broadly speaking.
Right.
And so my line of thinking is the more we can expose this and get it in front of people, the more repudiated it's going to become, because it's already unpopular. I mean, we have data from the PRRI Institute. They track Christian nationalism. We see how it's not popular with most Americans.
Right.
So I think the more we popularize it, hopefully the more we can push it back.
Look, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like the theology around Christian nationalism is dominion theology or dominionism. Is that correct? I mean, it's this basic idea that the nation is supposed to be run by Christians, specifically white, able-bodied, straight Christian men. Is that correct?
You're pretty much, yes, that's correct. The term dominionism actually comes out of a prolific writer back through the 1960s and 80s. His name it's a funny name, but it's real. His name is R.J. Rushdoony. And he was someone who developed this dominion theology, which essentially says that we have to take over American law and institute what he calls his biblical law. And over time, different evangelical groups pick up on those traces and kind of morph into their own thing. So yes, it's very much based on, now the term might be called the Seven Mountain Mandate.
Right.
So there's been kind of an evolution of dominionism, right? And the Seven Mountain Mandate got developed in the 90s and early 2000s. I don't want to go too in the weeds on how it was there.
No, but the Seven Mountain Mandate is basically like the seven dominions of our society, right? So people understand that that's arts
right.
and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, religion. Those seven elements should be dedicated and controlled by Christian, probably men.
Yes, I would argue white conservative Christians, and usually men. That is correct. Yes, and that's called the Seven Mountain Mandate. It's a very popular theme in Christian nationalist spaces. And again, not to sound too extreme, but I've been to these events. I visited America Fest. I know what I'm talking about because I've seen it, I've heard it. These people truly believe that they've been given a call or a mandate by God to do this. So it's not just, a hypothesis. It is a militant religious calling that their God has called them to take over the seven mountains of influence to make America a more quote unquote Christian country, which again, I find hilarious, but that is true.
Yeah. And like you're saying, clearly these people understand they are not the majority sentiment in the country, that their ideas are not broadly popular, that they could never win a majority Democratic election based on their ideas or their candidates. So this is why this group is sort of looking to bypass democracy and use our system against us. Like the writer Heather Cox Richardson was just writing about how we are watching, if we are paying attention, this minority try to impose its will in the majority. And we have people in power, like major power, like the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, saying...
And Supreme Court justices.
Right? Supreme Court justices. But, you've got Mike Johnson. He's saying that he tries to do what his constituents want, but sometimes what his constituents want doesn't line up with the principles of government as designed by God. That's a quote. And so he says it's important to have the conviction to stand up to our own people and do what God wants. And I think, excuse me, sir, like God is speaking directly to you. Like this is the man who is the second in line to the presidency, basically saying, thank you very much for your input, but I'm in power and I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to God because he speaks directly to me. And that seems not great for the rest of us.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Not great. That's a very professional way of saying it. I would say it's effing scary. I don't want to curse on your podcast, but it is.
Well, you can.
It is. It's scary as hell. There we go. We'll split the difference. But yes, and to be very clear, Mike Johnson has compared himself to the figure of Moses in the Bible. He sees himself as a new Moses figure leading his people out of tyranny, essentially, by using tyrannical and authoritarian measures if needed, right? And so this is important because you're right. Let me tell you what Christian nationalism is not for. It does not care about pluralism. It hates pluralism. It does not care about democracy. If democracy works for them, they'll keep it. But if it doesn't, it can go. It doesn't care about trying to work with other people groups or faith groups. It views liberals as literally demonic. You can look up quotes from people like Sean Foyt that the left are full of demons or is full of demons. So they're not looking to find the common ground for the greater good. They're looking to be in charge and to make sure everyone else assimilates underneath of what they believe, right? And Mike Johnson is actually a perfect example of how they want to present. Because Mike Johnson, he doesn't come across like Trump, right?
No, he comes across like Ned Flanders.
Yeah, super kind, and he's measured and realistic, yet his views are way more extreme than Trump's. Trump, I don't think is a man of integrity or character on anything. He'll just go whatever gets him into office. Mike Johnson is full of real conviction. He would love to see Obergefell overturned. That's the Supreme Court decision that solidified gay rights federally. He would love to see that go away. He would love to see a world where abortion for any reason is totally outlawed. He is what is called an abolitionist. This is not pro-life. This is another level of extreme. These people are in favor, I'm not exaggerating, of punishing women, even by using capital punishment if necessary, for those women who get abortions.
Yeah.
This is real stuff. And this person, to your point, sits second in line to the presidency. That should scare us.
Yeah, it should absolutely scare us. I mean, and it should scare us that he's not an outlier. He's just at the forefront of the movement. He is out here telling us that this patriarchal white man power structure is what God wants. And they are ready and willing to pull out all the stops, including, as you said, ending democracy and many of our fundamental human rights to rule over us in God's name. And it's a terrifying reality. And I feel like Christian nationalists are showing us their plan to create this authoritarian government rooted in this extremist version of Christianity. And it's happening all around the country, from the Texas GOP platform to what's going on with the Louisiana Supreme Court to the Oklahoma state senators, creating legislation to ban
Devers.
To ban porn recently. This isn't fringe, and it's also all written down in Project 2025, which is the policy plan to be implemented as soon as a Republican, doesn't even have to be Donald Trump, a Republican becomes president. And if anyone listening doesn't know about Project 2025, please go back and listen to our top of the year episode with the journalist Ahmad Baba. We went through Project 2025 piece by piece. But it's also the flags, right? These flags being flown in full view of everyone.
Appeal to heaven flags.
Yeah, the appeal to heaven flags, all these flags that are like the Christian, the one that's outside Mike Johnson's office, which is for you have an acronym for it, the Christian.
Yeah, that's the appeal to heaven flag. It's the NAR.
NAR flag, that's right. Mm-hmm. But these extremists are making real progress. And I think we should be really clear that in this new America, anyone who doesn't fall in line with them will be punished. And that is not faith. That's fascism. And we should really recognize that for what it is. This podcast is sponsored by Marley Spoon. You guys, my family has been doing Marley Spoon for 3 weeks now, and I can say in all honesty, it is head and shoulders above any other meal kit we have ever tried. I'm not kidding. It is a night and day difference. Our entire family, including our kid, is floored by the quality of the food and the selection of the options. Every week, there are over 100 different and delicious recipes to choose from. We like it so much, we went from doing 3 meals a week to 4. We also added on some lunches from their online market, things like frozen prepared food and smoothies. You can pick a day that you want the box to arrive, and before it shows up, you get an email from Marley Spoon reminding you what you ordered and what extra ingredients you're going to need to complete the recipes. It's ordinary stuff like olive oil or salt and pepper, but it's so helpful to know ahead of time in case you've run out of something and you can get it before the food arrives. The whole system is so helpful and organized, as well as being completely customizable. Our family eats everything, but if you're looking for vegetarian meals, family-friendly dishes, dishes for bigger families, low-carb options, Marley Spoon has choices for you as well. I personally look for the ones that say family-friendly because they have short cooking times and everyone likes them. But you can also order things like a roast or a spare rib dinner with all of the fixings. It's amazing. They even have individual extra portions of the proteins or the vegetables. You can make a flippin' cake from scratch or order a container of cookie dough to make cookies after the dinner. In our last order, I ordered a bunch of individual pizzas for my freezer because they come from the fancy pizza place that we love in LA. Marley Spoon is just not your typical meal kit. So experience the most personalized meal kit today with Marley Spoon. Head to marleyspoon.com/offer/PoliticsGirl and use the code PoliticsGirl for up to 25 free meals. That's right, up to 25 free meals with Marley Spoon. That's MARLEY spoon.com/offer/PoliticsGirl for up to 25 free meals. And make sure you use my promo code PoliticsGirl so they know that I sent you. Marley Spoon. I totally understand why Martha Stewart gave it her stamp of approval. So I recently ordered 7 boxes of Mosh bars. 7 boxes. I don't get a discount. They don't give it to me for free. I paid full price for the only protein bar I actually like. Ultimately, I don't eat that well during the day, but I have to put something in my body to keep it from collapsing, and I found Mosh bars was the way to go. I've talked about Mosh bars before. Mosh is a company founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger with a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to make something beyond your average protein bar. Each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health, like lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. And with 6 delicious flavors, each bar also gives you 12 grams of protein. Plus, they also have a line of plant-based protein bars if that's how you eat. I'm always going on and on about their lemon and white chocolate flavor, which is why I ordered 2 boxes of that. But honestly, they are all good. My boys love the cookies and cream and the chocolate peanut butter crunch. And here's the best part. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and Mosh is working closely to close that gap between men and women's health research. This is a personal mission for Maria. Her father suffered from Alzheimer's, and since then, she and Patrick have dedicated themselves to finding ways to help other families dealing with this debilitating disease. So if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and brain, Mosh bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/politicsgirl and save 20% off plus free shipping on either their best-selling trial pack or the new plant-based trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the bestsellers or plant-based trial pack at moshlife.com/politicsgirl. Thank you, Mosh, for continuing to sponsor the Politics Girl podcast. So I've been talking a lot about Rhone lately. Rhone is a performance lifestyle brand with stylish, functional business casual wear that's both high quality and comfortable. I ordered a couple shirts and pants for my boys from what Rhone calls the Commuter Collection, which is a comfortable, breathable, versatile set of products for men with pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, polos, and blazers. They look great alone, but they all work seamlessly together. Rhone is treated with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology for more wears between washes. But also, it's the summer, so it'll just let you stay fresh and clean all day long. Rhone's signature 4-way stretch fabric is breathable, flexible, and works everywhere from the golf course to the office. The Commuter Collection also features wrinkle release technology and is 100% machine washable. I think I'm actually going to get my son a couple more pairs of pants and some polos because he's supposed to wear business casual for a 10-day college course, and it's going to be hot. I don't want him to be uncomfortable and sweating his face off, and I think the Commuter Collection can really help with that. So check it out for yourself. The Commuter Collection can get you through the workday and straight to whatever comes next. Just head to rhone.com/politicsgirl and use the promo code PoliticsGirl to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/politicsgirl and use the code PoliticsGirl. As they say at Rhone, it's time to find your corner office comfort. Check out their website today at rhone.com/politicsgirl. Finally, today's podcast is sponsored by Sundays for Dogs. You have heard me talk about my golden doodle Chips before. He's a dream dog, the most brilliant, lovely, handsome, kind, chill boy. We could not love him anymore. But he is a picky eater with a sensitive stomach. So I can tell you, in all honesty, that finding a food like Sundays for Dogs that he will actually eat was such a pleasure. Sundays for Dogs is a fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. It was co-founded by a practicing veterinarian who tests and formulates every version of each recipe. Sundays contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients or artificial ingredients. And unlike other fresh dog foods, Sundays doesn't require refrigeration or preparation because of their air drying process, so you can just pour and serve. And I know this sounds stupid, but we love the bag it comes in because of the reseal strip. It works so well. Like you wish your Ziploc worked like this. Why all companies haven't figured out what Sundays for Dogs has figured out is beyond me, but it makes using their food so much easier. Chips likes the beef and the chicken. His stomach is normal and settled. I even give him some between meals sometimes when he's feeling a little peckish. And yes, I can tell when my boy needs a little nosh. I'm making less garbage with the canned foods, and it's delivered to my home on reoccurring order. The whole thing is efficient and effective. So if you want to try this delicious food for your dog, go to sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl to get 40% off your first order. That's sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl, or use the code politicsgirl at checkout for 40% off. Because I know your dog is just as special to you as Chips is to me, and they deserve food that's not only good for them, but that they want to eat. sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl. In this new America, anyone who doesn't fall in line with them will be punished. And that is not faith. That's fascism. And we should really recognize that for what it is.
Yeah, I want to make one point that I think is important. Well, first off, I agree. Everything you said is on the money. High five to you on that. Top tier. You know, it's interesting. These beliefs statistically are fringe, and they don't care. That's why they don't care about democracy, because they know their beliefs are fringe. They are extreme, but that doesn't mean that somehow they're not dangerous, or if they get access to the power that they want, they won't impose those beliefs on you anyway, right? So yes, they are fringe and they are extreme, and they are working through all different methods, whether it's the courts or through putting Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, to accomplish that, regardless of what the will of the people might or might not want, right? And that's an important distinction, because I hear often in my spaces, oh, Tim, you're just picking on fringe people. Yeah, who are hellbent on getting power. That's how this works.
Or who already have it. I mean,
exactly. And they're funded, right? They're funded by billionaire shadow networks. I mean, for people who want a resource on this, Catherine Stewart's work, The Power Worshippers, is a deep dive on the money trail that funds all of this stuff, right? And you're totally correct. Project 2025 should terrify people. It's not like they're being secretive. They're saying everything out loud. There's a man. This is a real deep cut, but it's good for your audience to know. His name is Doug Wilson. He's over in Moscow, Idaho. He's extreme. I mean, he's very extreme. He says publicly in his lifetime, he wants to add Jesus Christ is Lord into our Constitution. That's one of his goals. He wants to add an amendment to the Constitution that adds in some kind of preamble, Jesus Christ is Lord. The goals are not working together. It's not pluralism. It's not making room. It's not democracy. It is, we have to make this a Christian country. And by Christian, let me be very clear. I'm going to rant. I'm sorry.
Do it.
I'm not talking about the love your neighbor as yourself, take care of the sick, take care of the poor, let's get affordable healthcare in the country kind of Christian nationalism. I mean, if they were all about that, let's talk and reason together, you know? I'm not talking about forgiving debt every 7 years. No. We're not talking about those kinds of things, or welcoming the immigrant. Those parts of Christian thinking and teaching and verses in the Bible, we're not talking about that. We're talking about stone gay people to death. I'm not exaggerating. Look up R.J. Rushdoony, what he advocated for. I'm talking about, hey, if a woman commits adultery, she should probably be punished and put in prison. Hey, if someone has an abortion, the doctor and the woman should be punished. Hey, roll back the Civil Rights Act. That's a real thing that people in these spaces are advocating for, because it is anti-white in nature. Okay, we're not talking about the teachings of Jesus, love your enemy. To put it very succinctly for your audience, Jesus teaches us as Christians to bear a cross for our enemies, and Christian nationalism wants to build a cross to crucify theirs. That's the difference. So it's not just Christianity, it's a very specific strain of Christian thinking that is militant and that will take over if it gets the chance to do it.
Yeah. And ironically, they think they're saving the country from our lack of morals.
Totally. I mean, there's a whole propaganda thing behind this, right? This is very classic American borderline fascist thinking that America's in cultural decay and our men are being attacked. I mean, you can look through history and it's the same playbook. Immigrants are taking our jobs. This is David Duke, KKK, Grand Wizard talking points about the Great Replacement theory that now people like Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA are repeating. So there's nothing new here. But it is the same cycle of white supremacy thinking that is just wrapped in religious language that wants to take back the country for the true Americans, right? Which are not the immigrants, not the people of color. They are the white Americans. They're the true Americans.
Yeah. And I think the difference here would be that they have a real chance of succeeding. They have enough levers of power between the Electoral College, Trump, the Republicans, Mike Johnson, the Supreme Court justices, that they could actually pull this out and then make the rest of our lives hell, because these are the people that are preparing for, as you said, a national abortion ban and ending access to contraception and banning pornography and banning gay marriage and jailing sodomites. These are the people that are connected to people in our legislatures that are pushing for child marriage and the trad wife movement and forcing women back into the home, right? Like a New York Times writer recently wrote that if you don't think this country is sliding towards theocracy, you're not paying attention. We just had a top Trump advocate at a conference with Steve Bannon, who's a Trump advisor and a monster. And he said out loud, we are here to destroy democracy. We didn't get it fully done on January 6th, but we're going to finish the job. And his goal, and he said to the audience of screaming, cheering people, is to get rid of democracy and replace it with this. And he held up a cross. And he said, all glory to God, not to government. All glory. And the whole room said, to God, right? The plan is to rule in quote unquote God's will. But we have to say, the question is, who speaks for God? Because these hateful, violent people seem to think that they do. And that is a real problem for the rest of us.
Lee, I wish I can tell you, oh, you're really exaggerating. I study this stuff deeply. I go to these events. This is the sky is falling thinking. But you're right on the money. I have met Charlie Kirk. I've talked to these people behind the scenes. I've gone to their events. I've done the interviews. I've read the books. I've watched what they say online. It's all true. It's all true. And if someone thinks that we're exaggerating, you should go on Twitter and just start digging, and you will find people saying stuff exactly like that. Exactly like that. Some people even say we need an authoritarian leader like Trump to get our country back on track. And don't forget, Trump came on the scene less than 10 years ago. Before this, who was the Republican nominee? Mitt Romney. I miss Mitt. Bring back Mitt.
We all miss Mitt.
The guy who yeah.
I'm a full Democrat and I miss Mitt.
I'm just saying, think about how far the RNC has gone so quickly, and the level of dehumanization and propaganda that Trump unleashed into the world that, unfortunately for me, has been completely bolstered by white evangelical networks. That's the most frustrating thing for me, is watching my own faith tradition not just be silent, but be blatantly complicit in forming this. And that's just the reality.
Yeah. And let me ask you then, because I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that it helps that Christians are constantly claiming to be the victims of this culture, of the cancel culture and persecution. This concept that American Christians are the persecuted class. And I just... not only are they the most privileged group in the nation, I mean, you point out that you point out on your own social media that the majority of U.S. government officials are Christian, right? American Christianity has its own multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. Evangelicals can clearly swing elections. And as you point out, right, not only are evangelicals not persecuted, they often enjoy privileges that other religious groups are not afforded. But what they're afraid of is losing their power and privilege. So they've become very paranoid that any attempt to give others similar rights is an attack on them. And so they see that as a persecuted class. You've got Samuel Alito saying that, at events, for Federalist Society events, that we are the most persecuted class. And the way to hold that back is Second Amendment. And I was like, did a Supreme Court justice just say that Christians are persecuted and they need to use the guns? Is that what just happened?
Right.
But that is what just happened.
Totally. Again, what Jesus are we following? The Jesus of the Bible bears a cross. He is literally killed by the empire and doesn't use an AR-15, unlike what Lauren Boebert speculates, right? But she made a comment about that. If Jesus just had a gun, he never would have been crucified. What are you doing? It's really a mockery, honestly, of our faith. And that's why it gets me so angry. But you're totally right. I mean, on everything that you just said, I completely agree. I call it the American Christian persecution complex. That's what I call it. And here's the problem. The problem, on top of all of what you just said, which is that it's based in complete mass hysteria of fear mongering. Let me just say, for your audience who didn't grow up like I did, this is part and parcel of the evangelical psyche. Movies like Left Behind, where you might get raptured one day, right? are all part of the world that we grew up in. We're taught very early on that if our children go to a secular college, they're going to be indoctrinated by liberals. I mean, I was a kid hearing this. Any day, Democrats might want to take away your Bibles and throw you in prison for your faith. So we are steeped in this, but also, and maybe even more importantly, it actually devalues real religious persecution that is happening to Christians and other religious groups around the world right now. There are Christians that are legitimately persecuted for their faith in other parts of the world. And so when I hear evangelicals say, look at how tough we have it here, we're being persecuted simply because queer people want the same rights that they do, I go, wow, how much more narcissistic can you be? Do you have any kind of global outlook on the fact that there are real people who are in parts of the world where if they do say they're a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist or whatever else it could be, that they could literally be put in prison or even killed for their faith?
Yeah, look at the poor Uyghurs in China. They're like in a concentration camp for being Muslim in China. So like that's persecution.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
They've lost conceptual any ideas of what's sort of real. And I think they're sort of living in this father knows best patriarchal throwback land. And I think that's what gets us to the point where, as you've pointed out, Christian nationalism in general is one of the greatest threats to women in America. And I agree with that statement so wholeheartedly. But can you expand on that for me? Because obviously I talk about women's issues all the time here. I am a woman. I grew up with far more rights now than any younger girl has in this country now.
Yeah.
Please explain to me, because you, like many people, were one of those people that responded to that NFL kicker Harrison Butker's commencement speech about women's lives not beginning until we're a wife and a mother. And you said that way of speaking demeans women as human beings, this idea that we don't exist until we're reflected in our husband's light and start taking care of our husband's babies. And I feel like this idea is a very American Christian construct. It's been told to us sort of through a white picket fence lens, right? Where the male provides and the American dream wife stays at home and she's a good Christian woman and she waits hand and foot on her husband. And I think, this idea that thinking this is the perfect example of how a woman should be is nothing but patriarchal constructs that are damaging to women because it doesn't allow us to choose anything. And it assumes that men know what's best for us, which of course, being a woman, I can tell you that is not the case.
Are you sure though, Lee? I mean, I as a man, let me explain to you why I think you're wrong on this. You're correct. And man, just so many ways to go with this. I'll put it this way. A big target in evangelical spaces, even before they became Christian nationalists, has always been feminism. There are many male pastors in my space that I existed and grew up in who will tell you feminism was one of the worst things to happen to Americans. I mean, in fact, lest we forget, if you want a more pop culture example, Jerry Falwell, the founder of Liberty University, when 9/11 happened, blamed 9/11 as God's judgment for the feminists and the abortionists and the gays. So that's just how deep-seated the hatred for feminism is in these white evangelical spaces. So there's already a layer of that feminism is a net loss. It's destroyed womanhood, yada, yada, yada. It's so funny to me now because I'm like, all people are asking for is the choice to make decisions for themselves, right? Like, I don't know why that's such an extreme statement. And listen, to be perfectly frank with you, me and my partner, my wife, Sarah, she is home with the kids. I'm the one who brings in, the income to make it work. That's just how it worked out, though. It wasn't like this is how it has to be. We live in New Jersey. I run a small nonprofit. So we got to pinch the pennies, and it would make no sense to have her work just to pay for childcare because we can't get that either in this country, right? So it's not out of a motive of I'm the husband, she's the wife, but we have a very traditional setup in that sense, but we both chose that together. That's the difference, right? The key here is not that being a wife or a mother or that being your full-time vocation is inherently bad or demeaning. Of course not. That's a valid way to walk through the world. And I applaud people who do that. I think that's really beautiful. However, Christian nationalists have a view that God has ordered the nuclear family to be in a way where there's actually, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the umbrella picture. Have you seen this umbrella picture before? Of like, there's a whole image and it's like 3 different umbrellas and it shows like how the authority structure, the hierarchy works. And it goes like Christ, I think a husband, the wife, and the children. And it kind of shows like the authority line, right? It also shows how umbrellas don't work because you don't have 4 umbrellas underneath each other, by the way. I'm just saying. But But so I say that because that's very much baked into this world. We're like, okay, here's the hierarchy. Man talks to God, a man leads his wife, wife takes care of the home and leads the children. That's kind of the thing. To make it even worse than you think, though, there are people who are advocating for repealing women's suffrage. They believe that we should go back to a household vote where the man decides with his wife, term used very loosely, how the household should vote for federal, and local elections. So there is a massive push in this space to repeal all of the hard-fought gains of the feminist movement throughout American history. Ironically, if you don't mind me, if you would humor me, it is infuriating to watch people like Ali Stuckey, who benefit from the feminist movement, who make a lot of money doing what they do, rail against feminism and advocate for traditional gender roles.
And who is this Stuckey character?
Wait, Ali Stuckey? You don't know who Ali Stuckey is?
No, I don't know who Ali Stuckey is.
No, Lee.
I don't.
Candace Owens?
Oh, Candace Owens. Yeah, of course.
Oh, we should talk more offline. I got something to tell you. But
you guys, you got to look up Ali Stuckey. Apparently, I am ignorant.
Well, be careful. Be very careful. You're not going to. She's someone who's on the war against IVF. It's one of those. It's very extreme. Anyway, there are people like Candace Owens, we can say, or Nikki Haley, or Carrie Lake, right? There's tons of women in government and in the public limelight who make a lot of money being like, women's suffrage might not be that great, or at least they will tolerate that language, or they'll say, women, get married as soon as you can and have as many babies as you can. And then, let your husband lead, while they themselves are doing the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So it's just so fascinating to watch how this world works.
Right. Yeah, it's very fascinating to see women who have positions of power telling other women not to take positions of power. And it really shouldn't be this complicated to understand. Like, if a woman wants to stay home and be a mom, she should be able to. If a woman wants to have a career, she should be able to have one. Men get to have a career and children, but women are supposed to choose, and they either choose to be heathens or they choose to be good women. You know what I mean? Like, I raised my son at home as a stay-at-home mom, totally happy. So glad I did it. I am a diehard feminist. I work now full time. You know what I mean? But I am very pleased to have done that. If I had been working full time, my husband probably would have stayed home full time, because it is nice to have a stay-at-home parent if you can do it, if you can swing it. We're not saying don't do that. The thing is, we don't want to be stripped of our choices. We don't want to be stripped of our vote. We don't want to be stripped of our autonomy. We don't want them taking it through abortion. We don't want them taking it through our marriage, and we don't want them taking it through our vote. And it should not be that difficult to understand. And yet it goes back to control.
Can I just, you got me all fired up. You got me talking about things I love talking about. So if you would just humor me for one more minute, can I also add what's so infuriating about the Christian nationalist space is hearing about how they're all pro-family. We need pro-family values. But yet they think that affordable healthcare for all people is socialism. They won't expand subsidized childcare. They don't care about mandating livable wages from corporations that suck up billions of dollars in profit off of the working class. They think it's somehow lazy to have paid family leave taken care of by the government. So it's not even like
no, they voted against the childhood tax credit. They voted against universal pre-K. They voted against funding public schools.
It is wild. Like, what reality are we living in? Just be consistent. I would have so much more respect for that kind of person. They're like, listen, we have to get livable wages back in the country, and we can do it because Amazon's profiting billions and not paying their workers fairly. Hey, okay, I can get behind that. But somehow when I say that, which is way more pro-family in my opinion, that's socialism? What do you expect to happen? In what America in 2024 can one person stay home with the kids and one person work a normal full-time job and actually make it work? Like, very few people. It just drives me crazy.
Unless we change the policy. If you really want to make America, quote unquote, great again, most people are thinking of the 1950s. They're thinking of a one-family household that could afford a house, a car, vacations, and children. And we can't have that without changing policies. And all the policies that might change that are Democratic policies. And like you said, Christians can't vote for Democrats. Listen, before you go, I want to talk about this recent 24-hour conversation you did with a conservative Christian, because it was so
with Paul and Morgan,
it was so fascinating, and you dove deep into almost every controversial topic. It was you and this conservative Christian. What did you learn from that conversation, and what did you hope other people could learn from listening to it?
Well, it's tough to say that I learned anything, only because I grew up that way.
Yeah, you knew where he was coming from. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I in many ways, I even empathize because I know how your brain can be wired to see things that way. I totally do. So I didn't really learn much in that sense, but it was a good reminder. I often think about pragmatically, how do we get what we want? And what I want minds to change in a good way, like towards human flourishing, towards justice and inclusivity. And we do that not through dehumanizing people. We don't do it. My views were not changed by being called a bigoted jerk online. It never really worked. It was friends who held space for me, right? And so it was a reminder that, having conversations, hopefully planting seeds, could lead to future change. But it was nothing surprising. I mean, all of the arguments and all of the points that they made, I've heard and even have utilized myself at some point. I hope, though, that people see it and recognize that, you can be a Christian that is actually fully affirming of queer rights and queer people and is fully inclusive and is actually more justice oriented, not because they're ignoring their faith, but because they're taking their faith more seriously. And that's I think, maybe one of the positives about what I see. There are a lot of great evangelicals and other faith leaders who are waking up and who are really yelling about Christian nationalism. So that brings me a lot of joy to see that. But yeah, it was being with them for 24 hours. It was a treat. I had a lot of fun, and it's been crazy to be on it for sure. So it's been wild.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're out here having those conversations because, as you said, like, if we want minds to change, we can't do that through shutting each other out or dehumanizing each other. We really do need to sit in the space and have the conversations and say, like, why do you believe this? And why is that? Because that's what happened to you. You were well steeped in the faith, and it was a couple things in a row that made you go, wait a second, for a second. And then all of a sudden there's space. And I always say, once the wool is off your eyes, you can't put it back on. Once you start questioning, you're going to keep questioning. That's how it works. It's why they don't want their children to go to liberal universities, because once you start questioning, it doesn't stop. It's what happens when you are curious and you are open-minded. And I think ultimately that's what we want, not to send people away from the Christian faith, because the Christian faith by nature, just like the Jewish faith or the basis of the Muslim faith or the basis of Buddhism, is all based in love and hope and acceptance. It's when it gets to the extreme edges, the real fringe, even if the fringe has power, that these religions become detrimental to our society.
Yeah, I mean, if religion can be used as a tool for liberation or a weapon for oppression. And in the American context, we've seen how the Christian religion has been used for both, right? Many of the same people who were fighting for segregation also had counterparts that were Christian fighting for integration. Think about Martin Luther King Jr. He was totally steeped in his faith tradition that motivated him to see the change. And there were many white evangelicals even back then who were seen as radical who were working with him. So I agree. I understand some people might think that all religions is inherently bad. I get why they would see that. But the reality is it's always more complicated than that. And the question is, what do we do with religion? How do we use it as a way to promote human flourishing instead of drawing tighter boundaries and othering the other? And I think that's when it becomes very problematic.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. This is the kind of conversation that is so important, not just for Christians who are seeking their way amongst today's Christianity, but for the rest of us that have to live alongside it. So please tell people how they can follow your work and continue to support what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, that's super kind. So anywhere that you find the New Evangelicals on any social media platform, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, we have a website. You can sign up and become a member. All of our work is paywall free, by the way. So there's no barrier to entry financially. We're a nonprofit. So you can sign up for our community map or our Zoom groups, or you can follow us on YouTube. I mean, really anywhere that is a digital footprint, we're usually there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. As a man of faith living in this world right now, what do you have to say to people before you go about these people that are attempting to take over our country in the name of God that you both believe in?
How about some good news? Here's the good news.
Leave us
the
with
good
some
news
good
is
news.
that here's the good news. Christian nationalism statistically is overwhelmingly not popular in the US. Only about 30% of Americans, and even out of that, about 10% are real strict adherents of Christian nationalism. About 60% of Americans fully reject or are very skeptical of the idea. So that's very positive. Another thing I'll say is there are many people and many organizations, both Christian and faith-based and not, that are doing amazing work to fight this stuff back behind the scenes. So you have Americans United, that's a secular organization doing amazing work. You have Christians Against Christian Nationalism, the Baptist Joint Committee, Faithful America, Red Letter Christians, and so many others that are also aware of the problem and are actively doing our best to resist it and offer people a better way forward.
Well, a better way forward is what we all want. Thank you so much,
Hell yeah.
Tim. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so, so much. And keep doing this amazing work because it really is what our country needs.
Thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure to be on here. Let's keep in touch for sure. We have a long election cycle ahead of us.
Yes, we do. So that was Tim Whitaker, reminding us that this fringe Christian movement is actually a real threat to America, that it's a danger to women, to minorities, to the marginalized, and to democracy itself. That while these white Christian nationalists believe it is their calling to save the country from heathenism and lack of morals, what they're really offering is a theocracy with top-down control and them at the top. We must see this threat for what it is and remind ourselves that they are not the majority, only a very loud minority, and we can defeat their right-wing extremism through everything from conversation to voting. I want to thank Tim for joining us today, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go and check out the new Evangelicals or tell a Christian you know about them, because we can't fix things unless we address them. Until next week, peachy out. The PoliticsGirl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.